Hello, everybody. I am Azita Talagani, professor of Persian language, literature, and linguistic at the University of Toronto. I welcome you all to another inspiring monthly Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies virtual lecture series on literature in Persian language pedagogy, jointly organized by the University of Toronto and University of Chicago. I am co-convening this lecture series with my colleague, Professor Mir-Djalali, from the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilization and the University of Chicago. We are grateful for the support of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies and its director, Professor Mohammad Tawakkoli Targhi, for their constant support, and all sponsoring academic units. University of Toronto, Faculty of Art and Science, Department of Near and Middle Eastern Civilization, Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilization, Division of the Humanities, as well as the Center of Middle Eastern Studies of the University of Chicago. Iran Namak, a quarterly of the Canadian Society of Iranian Studies, and Roshan Cultural Heritage Institute. At the outset, I'd like to express our collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississauga of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work, to teach, to do research, and prosper in their ancestral homeland. It would be my great pleasure to welcome Professor Pardis Minuchehr to the University of Toronto and our lecture series. Professor Minuchehr holds a PhD from Columbia University in comparative literature and Middle Eastern studies. She's currently a visiting scholar at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She has taught Persian language, literature, and film courses at various institutions in the United States, including the University of Pennsylvania from 2003 to 2011, George Washington University from 2011 to 2017, and the University of Virginia from 2018 to 2021. She has also taught abroad at Bilkent University in Ankara, Turkey, and as a Fulbright scholar at the Free University of Berlin. Her research and publications focus on issues related to the development of Persian language teaching, the Iranian diaspora from the early 20th century to the present, gender justice, postmodernism, world literature, decolonization, and trauma during the Second World War. She has also curated the Visual Pendar Film Festival in 2021 with the main focus on women and the environment in Iran. She's also currently producing movies on environmental issues and race. She's the former president of AATP from 2009 to 2014, and the program director of Persian Startup programs for pedagogical teacher training and material development. Today's lecture of Professor Minuchehr is focusing on flames, flowers, and butterflies, interpreting the literary language. My colleague, Professor Mir-Djalali, moderate this session, and please join me in welcoming Professor Minuchehr to our lecture series.
Thank you so much, Azita Jan and Pune Jan, for the invitation and for this generous introduction. Okay. Yeah, when Pune Jan asked me to join this session and this series, I was actually involved in various other projects and completely on different projects. Especially, I'm very, very grateful actually to the Iranica Cinema group at the University of Toronto, and I was writing all these articles for them and very busy with that. And then, of course, that you mentioned the Second World War project that I had engaged in. And then also, I was in Baluchistan, actually, when I got the email from you. So we were filming and capturing some of the music and dance traditions and rituals over there. So it was completely different. Different atmosphere, but I'm very grateful for the invite. And I should say that this is a disclaimer that that this is a work in progress. So I'm looking forward to your comments and feedback throughout. First of all, in addition to thanking Poonajan and Azitajan, I want to also thank the Mir-Djalali Institute and Dr. Mir-Djalali herself, who is actually present here as well. And of course, Professor Mohammad Tawakkoli Taghi as well, who's been at the head of this amazing institute. My talk today is titled as you see, Flames, Flowers, and Butterflies, which is a translation or an interpretation, I would say, of Sham'o Golo Parvane. And I see that indeed, actually, I can't see everybody, but I see that Sham'o Golo Parvane Hame Jamand, everybody is present here, the wonderful erudite colleagues and friends are here. As you see, the English title translates for me here as Sham for flames, Gul flowers, and Parvane butterflies. And I'm trying to keep the alliteration, literary alliteration with the F alliteration, flames, flowers, and butterflies here. But as you may have noted in my abstract, there is more than a literal meaning here for this frequently used Persian trope. And for the non-Persian speakers in the audience, when we say that flames, flowers, and butterflies are all here, as I mentioned, this is considered to be a compliment, to be a compliment to the erudite audience in Zoom today. The Sham Golo Parvane trope has been so frequently used that we hardly look back to its origins or question its figurative meaning, treating it more or less as a cliche. So today I want to examine the significance of studying literary tropes in Persian literature in our language classes. And for this presentation, I also added the subtitle Interpreting Literary Language, because I believe every or any act of translation is in a way an interpretation act, in the same way that music performers interpret musical compositions, like no Tchaikovsky will be performed exactly the way that the composer wrote and performed it. In fact, every single performance of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, which is very popular during Christmas time, is a new interpretation of the music by varied conductors and musicians, and in different cities all around the world. So in other words, every translation is a kind of interpretation unique to the person who is translating or interpreting it. So in this instance, it was a conscious choice not to translate Sham Golo Parvane as candles, flowers, and caterpillars. After all, Sham in Persian is the equivalent for the word candle or wax, and not necessarily flame. Parvane can be translated as moths or caterpillars, but butterfly just sounds a little bit better, I think. So this was actually a stylistic choice, one that is taken for many reasons. First, as I mentioned, it follows the alliteration. the F alliteration, flames, flowers, and butterflies. It sounds perhaps more literary in English, and it conveys a similar sort of, and not completely, but similar literary context in a way. If I had used candles, maybe it wouldn't have had the same kind of connotation or associated meaning as the word sham does in Persian. And caterpillar or moth may not, although moth these days is more literary, but it does not convey the same kind of beauty as the associated with the word parvane. So this is a stylistic choice, and one that conveys to the sense of the original, and it is an idiosyncratic choice that itself has its own challenges. For instance, what happens when we are also required to translate shole as flame next to the candle? And as I was doing the research on ganjour.net, and this is a wonderful resource, you know, you put sham and parvane and see how many poets have used sham or golo parvane. So it gives you a ton, I mean, multiple number of poets. So when I put sham, then it's, you know, the poems that came alongside the sham were, a lot of them had shole. So what do? Shole is also flame. So how do you translate it? So every interpretation has to take into consideration several things, including the style, the tone, the register, and certain preferences. And I believe Pune's presentation last session did a wonderful job raising many of those issues in this, in the issue of translation. So more than being words, the sham و گل و پروانه also convey meanings that are of figurative value, meaning that in Persian literature, they stand for other things. They symbolize other meanings, and they are metaphors of other concepts. So the question that arises here is, what do these words stand for? How do we define them for our listener, for our readers, and for our students? Okay. So the elementary question here is, so what is Persian literature? And since this is a series on Persian literature, I thought maybe it would be essential to define it. Modern Persian is probably one of the oldest modern languages. It is at least 500 or 600 years older than modern German, modern English, or modern French. Modern Persian is almost, if we believe the Yaqub Safari story that says the first sultan to require his poets to recite poetry in Persian was like Yaqub then we can date back modern Persian to almost 1,000 years. That puts the Safari dynasty as the first before the Samanids and the Ghaznavids. There is a small book in German by the late Bert Fragner called Persephone. I'm afraid this book has not been translated into English or even Persian, but I think this is a seminal book. I would recommend it also if anybody has the time and energy to translate it. Persephone, or the full title is called in German, Die Persephone, Regionalität, Identität und Sprachkontakt in der Geschichte Asiens. Persephone, like Francophone or Germanophone, is coining the word Persephone here. And the full title is Regionality, Identity, and Language Contact in the History of Asia. In this book, Fragner distinguishes between Persian as a mother tongue and Persian as a trans-regional language. Fragner uses the word polycentric to describe the Persian language, meaning that the Persian language did not have one center, but had multiple in history and in a wide geographical expanse. Persian evolved in various cities, in Lahore, in Shiraz, in Tus, in Herat, in Ganje, and many other cities to the west and east of what we call Iran today. The fact that Persian is a polycentric language makes the case of Persian and Persian literature even more complex, in addition to the fact that we have had over 10 centuries of modern Persian written and spoken. So just imagine a literature that has been evolving since at least the 9th and 10th century as modern Persian and in these varied centers of the world. So when we are talking about Persian literature, we need to be cognizant of this fact. We need to be cognizant of the variations of the language in a wide historical and geographical territory. But what do we mean when we say literature? Literature generally, and this is a dictionary definition, that it refers to written works of imaginative, artistic, or intellectual value, typically characterized by the use of language to convey ideas, emotions, and experiences. It encompasses various forms of written expression, such as novels, poems, plays, essays, short stories, and other literary works. So in other words, when we are talking about Persian literature, we are not only talking of the classical fakhir. In Iran nowadays, they call it the fakhir, adabiyat fakhir. We're not only talking about that, of Ferdowsi, Hafiz, and Rumi, but also of the vernacular and the contemporary works of the likes of Zoya Pirzad and Muradi Kermani, and of novels, of poems, and plays written in modern Persian in Iran, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, in Toronto and Chicago, and not to forget California. Okay. So the Sham و گل و پروانه, this is in Persian. There are two examples I'm giving here. These examples just show us that the trope was used in various contexts. It is commonly even used today in film and music. One example is Sham ast rukh khub to parvane manam. So this is from Najmuddin Razi. Your beautiful or your good face is a candle or a flame or a candlelight, and I am the butterfly. And then the other one is Shahin. This is Hafiz's. It's really it's very beautiful one, but there has a lot of puns involved as well. شاهین قصه مگر شمع آرد به زبان ورنه پروانه ندارد به سخن پروایی. So there is as I mentioned, there is a lot of this trope also used in music and film. I need to ask Dr. Heshami, can you help with the first clip?
Absolutely. So Dr. Minuchehr, can you stop sharing your screen and then I will display the video?
Oh, I have to stop it. Okay, sure.
Great. And the first one will be this video by Dilkash, is that correct?
Yes, the Dilkash, yes. So all of you, I'm sure you've heard of Dilkash, and this is, yes, this is a sort of an upbeat song of Gul o Parvane, Sham Gul o Parvane.
شم و گل و پروانه با هم به گوشه میخانه به عشق اون جانانه نوشم پیاله مستانه شد پیاده ساغر می از لب وی آن مشو غافل ای عاشق عاقل در گوشه تنهایی با مستی و شیدایی
Most people have no clue that in 2023,
Okay. So, can you see me? Hello?
Yes, yes, we see your
Oh,
slides.
okay. You see my slides. Okay, wonderful. This is Delcash. Of course, this is sort of mid-20th century, so mid-20th century use of an upbeat version of Shamgul Parvaneh. But as I mentioned, Shamgul Parvaneh can have multiple meanings, and it can note different things. The trope has various other meanings too. If you take a deeper look into the traits of Shamgul Parvaneh, we see that they are all referring to transitory beings. They are ephemeral. The candle burns and extinguishes. The flower is short-lived and dies, and the butterfly, having gone through the long evolution from the caterpillar worm to butterfly, lives only very briefly. So all three motifs here, the sham, the gul, parvaneh, point to an ephemerality. While they are transitory, however, they also have other traits. The candle brings light and heat. The flower has external beauty and scent, and parvaneh, the moth or the butterfly, flies freely and is associated with love and transformation. All three are literary symbols of the ephemeral as they capture that fleeting nature of life, and yet they stand for longevity and permanence in a paradoxical way that I shall explain later. Interpreting these concepts and interpreting their connotation poses a major challenge. How do we do this? Do we need to put paragraph-long footnotes and endnotes when translating and teaching them? So this brings us to the question of the importance of figurative language. There is not one definition for figurative speech, and there have been books written on it in both linguistics and literary sciences, or by literary scholars. Mostly it has been defined as figurative versus literal. Both cognitive linguists and psycholinguists have tried to define the mechanisms involved in metaphors, metonymies, synecdoches, paradox, oxymoron, irony, etc. But there is not one consensus as to what figurative language does. I actually was very surprised myself to find all the books written about figurative language. So many which pertain to the field of language study. Actually, I had a whole list up there, but now stopping sharing screen and doing it again, it seems may cause some trouble. So I'm not going to do that. But if you just go to your library, academic library, I'm sure just put in figurative language. There's like, hundreds of books that come up. And one such book I found interesting was called Figurative Language, published under the Cambridge Textbooks in Linguistics by Barbara Danziger and Eve Sweetser. They go deeply into defining figurative language and explaining its linguistic significance. One thing that I like to quote from them here is that they believe figurative language is pervasive, but not just in literature, but in value-laden domains such as religion, religious and political language, and in more prosaic domains like scientific discourse. So to give an example, they write about us using the words left versus right in politics to refer to sociopolitical opinion ranges. There's a joke that a Chinese leader tells his driver to signal left, turn right, meaning the rhetoric should be framed in terms of communist values, but actual policy should accommodate capitalism. In Persian, we also have rost or chap these days, but sometimes you need to ask chap from what historical era. So if it's chap from the leftists from before the revolution, they are leaning communists or Maoists, or today. or the chap after Khatami, after his rules, they are leaning as reformists. So, so that's also a difference in meaning there. I'm bringing this example only to show that figurative language even changes its meanings from context to context, from one era to another, from one geography to another. So figurative language and defining, translating, and interpreting figurative language is quite important in literature, in language classes that should translate into better understandings of politics and world affairs too. Some of the other tropes here that we have in Persian, Abrubad و مه خورشید و فلک در کارند, or we have Gul و Bulbul and Satare Sohail. I'm sure many of you can think of other ones that during the question and answer, maybe you can add. We have also challenge in interpretation also occurs in many of the other tropes we encounter in the Persian vernacular language, normalized in everyday speech. We say John, Johnam, Jigar, Jigareto, Qurban, Qurbaneto Beram. They are commonly used. Johnam meaning my life, my soul, but inherent in Janam is the fact that I shall give my life up for you, my soul up for you, which is part of the Persian hyperbole, no doubt. Or in Jigaram or Jigarat is another trope that is interesting. When we literally translate it, it will sound very cannibalistic in English language. Or the Western languages. Jigarito is actually Jigarito Bukhoram, may I eat your liver, translated literally, but we never translate it. We never translate that literally for our class. So we have to stick to endearing terms, but that's that's what's behind it. The most common trope of all of everyday language is Qurbanat Beram. I know many of you have tried translating it for your students as may I sacrifice myself for you, which is actually a common goodbye. And of course, we all love hyperbolic language. So Persian has many tropes and figurative language that we use on a daily basis. They have come into the daily language through literature or literary thinking, or they are made up, like these in politics, like Tondro, you know, that just stands for radical now. Degarandish is actually the post-revolutionary term for Roshanfikr, intellectual. So basically it's denigrating for the intellectuals. It's othering them in a way because degar means other and degarandish is other. So degarbash, or homosexual, is actually also an othering form, but has been normalized these days. So these are tropes that are in use in everyday language. But when we talk of Sham Gul Parvaneh, I want to also refer to the Mantiqotair, or conference of the bird story of Attar, where he tells the story of the Seymour and the 7 cities of love, Haft Shahr-e-Ishq, based on a Sufi eschatology. And in the 7th stage, where the lover and the beloved unite or reunite in the annihilation Fana stage, Attar tells the story of this candlelight as the matlub, the ma'shuq, for which the butterflies, the ashiqs, are striving for. But in the story, he depicts this reunion by using the tropes we talked about. And as Purjabadi has shown, these are Attar's story actually alludes to Ahmad Ghazali's and Hallaj's story. So I want to read a couple of lines from this, from Attar's Mantiqotair, from this hikayat, where he says, Yek shabi parvanegan jam amadan, dar mozifi talib sham amadan. So one night, all these butterflies came together, and they came together at this banquet looking for the sham, for the flame or the candle. جملگی گفتن میباید یکی کو خبر دارد ز مطلوب اندکی. So all of them said, so one of them should find out about the matlub. شد یکی پروانه تا قصری ز دور در فضای قصر دید از شم نور. So one of the parvanas, one of the butterflies, went and from afar in the palace saw a light from the this candlelight or the flame. بازگشت و دفتر خود باز کرد، وصف او در خورد فهم آغاز کرد. So he returned and okay, so Persian doesn't have any genders, so if I say he or she, disregard that. It could be she or he. So this butterfly returned and told what it saw. ناقدی کو داشت در مجمع مهی گفت او را نیست از شمع آگهی. So this critique said, no, you have no معرفت آگهی. So you don't know what is going on. شد یکی دیگر گذشت از نور در خیشتن بر شمع زد از دورتر. So the second butterfly went there and پرزنان در پرتو مطلوب شد، شمع غالب گشت و مغلوب شد. So and flied into the ray of the light and then came back. بازگشت او نیز مشتی راز گفت از وصال شمع شرحی باز گفت. So he returned and said a bunch of secrets and said that there was a union with this flame. But the naqed, again, this interlocutor or the critique actually said that you have to go back again. So the third butterfly went back and said, دیگری برخاست میشد مست پای کوبان بر سر آتش نشست. So the third butterfly goes on the flame and دست و گردن گشت با آتش به هم، خویش را گم کرد با او خوش به هم. So or خوش به هم. So they went and basically lost its life in the light. So so what is this all about? This is actually Attar's story has this interlocutor or a critique or an intermediary here who is the naqad, criticizing the first parvane going to unite Basel with the matlub, the candlelight, the flame from afar. The naqad admonishes the butterfly for not getting close. So the second butterfly goes and feels the fire of the flame and comes back. The naqad once again criticizes the parvane for not getting closer. The third parvane flies towards the fire, the wing and body in fire. This time the interlocutor acknowledges that this is the way of reunion, and we understand Attar Sufi thinking that it is only with annihilation or fana, that ma'rifat, the cognitive knowledge, of the divine is attainable. This fana concept, annihilation, is of course a paradox that it's not comprehensible in material terms, but it's comprehensible only in Sufi theology. And explaining to a student, a first-year student, for instance, that you need to first die to be alive forever, for baqa, so fana to be for baqa, in the 21st century world is indeed very challenging. So as this is a very abstract concept of a paradoxical nature, and if you do this on the first day of class, then students may not come back if you talk about fana from the very beginning. But so the end, I want to demonstrate how the seemingly aesthetically pleasing trope of Sham و گل و پروانه takes on a very abstract meaning that would perhaps require advanced knowledge about Sufism, about Islamic studies, its teachings, and history in the Islamic world. The polycentric nature of the Persian language furthermore complicates this knowledge too. Bilal Jan, can you please play the Elahé song so that the next
Absolutely.
clip.
Yeah. So if you could stop your screen share, and then I'll share mine.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, Bilal, I think this is enough. Okay, thank you. This was just to show how Elahé actually now is interpreting Sham و گل و پروانه. As you saw, Delkash's was a little bit upbeat, but Elahé's is now this Sham و گل و پروانه trope is causing it to be a رسوای زمانه, the scandal of the era. So it is a little bit of a, it is using this Attar's Sufi allegory and this, you have to become divaneh, masked, drunk, crazy in order to become annihilated so that you gain that longevity or baqa. So this is all, this kind of Sufi allegory is now inherent in the meaning of Sham و گل و پروانه by the end of the 20th century. At the end of last session, last talk, Azita Jan had a very important question. I thought that I don't think that it was that we had time to tackle it, but she asked about the question of motivation. And how do we motivate our students? How do we engage them in literature reading that is, especially in a literature that is replete of figurative language with 1,000 years of background behind it? So I'm glad that she raised this issue last time, because I believe this is definitely a major challenge for us all. So how do you motivate them? How do you engage your students? And how do you turn them into productive or increase their productivity during class time and outside? So I want to examine two main strategies here. that can be helpful when we are teaching Persian literature and grappling with ideas on how to introduce literature in our language classes. The first strategy that can be helpful, I think, is storytelling. And I think everybody loves stories with plots, with beginning, with a middle, with an end, with a climax, a conflict. There is also a lot of research coming out about association between memory and storytelling, that stories help you with memorizing concepts and languages. We can perhaps explore a little with that during class time for our classes and assignments. The second strategy is spiraling, which is considered one of the best practices in teaching language. Spiraling is one of the language teaching practices. It includes a systematic revisiting of the same material. Each time you revisit the content, a deeper knowledge of the topic is attained. Here in this presentation myself, I tried to give you an example of the spiraling, although it's like very short, but this spiraling can be within the session, can be within one semester, within multiple years. I tried to spiral the Sham و گل و پروانه trope, as I started on slide 1, by giving a literal meaning of the trope in the first slide. In the third slide, I put the figurative language into context in a couple of poems using this trope, and then we had Delkash reciting it. Then in slide 8, I retold Attar's story, accompanied in slide 9 with the semi-philosophical explanation of the concept of fana and its brief Sufi conceptual definition. This repetition and spiraling, as they call it in language teaching, has the benefit of reinforcing information over time and using prior knowledge to inform future learning. So if anyone wants to know more about the concept of fana and sham و گل و پروانه, this is the time to do at the very end. But at the same time, given the beauty of the Persian language, we can also explain that there are also other layers to this trope. So for instance, when we say that everything is sham و گل و پروانه or everything is گل و بلبل, we're not necessarily meaning that everything is good necessarily. On the contrary, we may be sarcastic in an ironical way and saying how terrible everything is. So when we say mamlekat gol و bulbul, you know, we may not be meaning that actually it's a wonderful country, but what a deplorable country it is, actually. So understanding irony, paradox, metaphors, and similes is very vital for language communication and for all kinds of exchanges. It can make the world of difference. And in my last slide, I want to point out a recent addition to our concern as educators, namely concern of artificial intelligence. While there are pros and cons, I think it will be inevitable for us all to embrace this artificial intelligence as a teaching tool sooner or later. The pros of this intelligence is that this is an invaluable resource for knowledge. But the cons is that, of course, no robots can show emotions, and they may miss irony, as the example of mamlekat gol و bulbul that I mentioned, you know, can be translated otherwise, which is a sarcastic expression to tell you what a deplorable country we have. So how are we as interpreters going to interpret this? And would it be like would the artificial translator be like, when I was growing up actually in Iran, the early years of the revolution, I remember that there was the saying that was on the wall that آمریکا هیچ غلطی نمیتواند بکند. And they also wrote the English translation as, yes, America can do no wrong. So those of you who know Persian know that this is actually missing the idiomatic meaning of the slogan, which means exactly the opposite of the translation that was offered on the walls of the street. So not knowing this figurative language, so I'm wondering, would the artificial intelligence be translating it like that? Would it be able to get the irony and the nuances of the language in any way? Not knowing this figurative language, hence, can have long-lasting political repercussions. Figurative language is an important component of language teaching, and teaching it through literature is essential for its deep understanding. I hope during this talk you have gotten a chance to think about some figurative languages you have taught, challenges teaching them, and would like to share it here for us. And thank you all for listening, and looking forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Minuchehr. It was an amazing talk. So like usual, I'm going to give an outline of what Dr. Minuchehr talked about to give you a chance to think about your questions. And then I might ask a question myself, or I might just ask you to ask your questions. So I found the structure of your presentation very interesting. In a way, you were teaching us, or you were presenting as if you're teaching us, and I found it very interesting. So Dr. Minuchehr started by telling us her translation of Shama Gul Parvane to flames, flowers, and butterflies, and then through her translation, she explained about alliteration, about the trope, about the significance of literary tropes in Persian language classes, and then about her stylistic choice of translating as flames rather than candle, for example. And she then talked about the figurative value and the metaphoric meaning, which has to be also transferred to the students, or in it. Another thing that I really liked about your presentation was that you were as if giving the two arguments, so how to use figurative language in a language class and how actually to deal with it when translating. She then talked about what is Persian literature, and then the history of Persian language as a polycentric language. And she gave us some examples of beautiful poems, one by Hafez, where Shama Gul Parvane is used. And she said you can go to Ganjur and look at others. Then she played Banu Delkash's, interpretation of Shama Gul Parvane, which was upbeat. And then she talked about metonymy, like the pen is mightier than the sword. Like these are the things that we have to teach our students, as well as just a mere language. And then she talked about translating and teaching figurative language. And also she mentioned the linguistic theories on figurative language. She mentioned a book. She referred us to read it for further information. And she talked about figurative language use in literature as well as in socio-temporal politics. And then she mentioned Shama Gul Parvane in Mantiqul Tayr and the paradoxical concept of fana, annihilation. And then, of course, to that dark note, she played Elahé's Shama Gul Parvane, which was not as upbeat as the other one. And she finished her talk by telling us about the strategies we can use in order to motivate our students, engage our students, and help them produce figurative language. And she mentioned two strategies. I'm sure that in her paper that she's going to write for us, she's going to mention even more. But the two strategies she used, she told us, was storytelling, which actually enhances the memory in second language learners, And then spiraling, which was a systematic revisiting the same material with broader and deeper explanations and practices, exactly what she did in her beautiful presentation. And she ended it with artificial intelligence and how sometimes it cannot be that useful or as useful as we think it could, though we must use it because it's part of the world and the life now, but it would not capture mamleket gol o bulbul, or it would erroneously translate other examples that she mentioned. So I have a lot of questions myself, but I would open the floor to questions and then I would come back to my own question to be a bodhisattva. Yes, Dr. Sohaili.
Oh, excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Now you're muted.
You're mute now, Dr. Sohaili.
Okay.
Okay, now we hear you.
All right. Now, Professor Minuchehr, thank you very much for elucidating the various concepts of figurative language, particularly with reference to Sham or Gul Parvane. But I have two short comments. Number one, I think there must be a distinction between a butterfly and a moth. A butterfly is more associated with flowers, and a moth is more associated with flame and light, according to the dictionaries. This is number one. And number two, students who study Persian poetry, I should say that Persian poetry encapsulates three challenges: images, rhetorical embellishments, as you went into some of them today, and substitutions or deviations from the standard rules of the language. And I think they are all of them intertwined. So students cannot focus on the figurative language, but at the same time ignoring the other aspects of the Persian poetry. So I would like to ask you to elaborate on my two comments, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sohaili. And actually, I really liked your comment last session too about the translator as traitor. So I think this applies here too. Maybe if I'm, that's also a stylistic choice for your first comment that's, if you use butterfly for the parvane, but that's a stylistic choice. For the second one, yeah, you're absolutely right. I have no comment on that. Those are absolutely, you have to first learn the rules of the language, of course, but then figurative language is what I was trying to show is that figurative language is not something that you have to leave it to the very advanced levels. It's like from the very beginning, with the very rudimentary stuff with qurbanat, you have to teach that very beginning of the class. Those things are very essential to know and to be able to teach and to explain to students. And but yes, your comment is very well taken. Thank you.
Thank you.
آقای مولایی بفرمایید.
Salam. Thank you so much. I learned so much from you in this session. I wrote a few points to make, but let me start with the one that's really refreshing in this day and age for an intelligent person to challenge AI. Mamleket Gul Bulbul is moved a little bit toward the slang, right? It wasn't. Yes. So how why not use my first name, Javad? Exactly. Because the new meaning is Taraf kheli Javade. So it was refreshing. Thank you. I have a short comment. I'm sure it was oversight on that Hafiz poem that you said شرح این قصه مگر شمع برآرد به زبان. The bar was, it was a mistake. I'm sure it was oversight. The bar was missing. But let's go back to my question. One other issue was the mixing of the plural and singular when you say sham. So in that شرح این قصه مگر شمع برآرد, I think, see when you translated it, you used plural. So that's another
yes, there is a generic plural, like when you say kitab, you don't mean only book, it's books, right? When you translate
right. So that's another condition.
So that's
anyway, I thank you so much. May I use 1 second to acknowledge Professor Shahabi, who is here, and I have learned from him also tremendously, because he and I both live in Boston, and I thought I'd say that. Thank you very much.
And I thank him for being present too from Paris, right? Thank you.
And so do we. Thank you. Professor
And I
Lawson.
thank all the friends from India and Iran and all over the world being present here too. I just saw them. I was not able to see when I was sharing the screen, but I just saw them. So thank you for being all here.
Professor Lawson.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Minuchehr, for this beautiful presentation. I was especially struck by the problem of tracking the, shall we say, venerable, very old Sufi understandings of words into the contemporary period. This is a very exciting project, and I would like to hear more and more about this, because it's not only an interesting intellectual project, but it's a very powerful phenomenon in the life of the Persian language and language in general. Thank you very much. I would just like to add my voice to Professor Sohaili about the use of butterfly in your title. Unfortunately, it does not fly for an English readership. No English reader will smell anything of the drama of the moth by the using of the word butterfly. In fact, it is the opposite. A butterfly is something that does not die because of its love or any other reason. And in line with Attar's preoccupation with such things as the nightingale and the rose thorn and the dying for the love of the rose and the smell of the rose, there's no butterfly that flies into a flame. It's a different species altogether. So I think that you will throw an obstacle in the path of your readership, even though it is stylistically, or shall we say, mellifluously more effective. The problem is that the entire meaning is subverted in this, in my humble opinion. But I enjoyed your presentation enormously, and thank you for all these ideas that you presented to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, point well taken. Yes, this is a stylistic choice, and as I said, it was an alliteration, attempt. But the flame doesn't work there either, because you have when you're translating shole, then what do you do with sham? So those are definitely good points. Well taken. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Gözde, you're next.
Thank you so much. This was fascinating, and I teach Turkish language at U of T. So I found this extremely relevant. And I don't have a question, but it's more of a comment. When you mentioned the history of Persian literature, there's, of course, this huge influence on Ottoman Turkish literature. And basically, all you said also applies exactly to what we do in our advanced Turkish and Ottoman Turkish and literature courses as well. We also, like, it's not only the vocabulary influence, but it's also the metaphors are there as well. So we also have bülbül, gül, you know, the same, all of those.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, all of that can also be applied to Turkish, Ottoman Turkish courses as well. So thank you so
And
much.
the
I found it
Sufi
very
teaching,
helpful.
the Sufi
Yes.
teachings too, actually,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
Rumi was in, you know, he actually never lived in the Iranian the area, but he lived in Anatolia.
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
so
absolutely,
absolutely. And
absolutely.
Beşiktaşis and, you know, all of those Sufi teachings that are in Turkey today are definitely their ideas mostly came from the Khorasan area, the greater Khorasan area. So
I mean, even in Turkish modern works and songs like you showed, it has now become a part of the culture as well. So we don't,
absolutely.
sometimes we say mum ve pervane, not sham,
there-
but mum, which is also, I believe, from Persian. But, you know, yeah, the figurative language is, yeah, transferred cross linguistically as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Teşekkürler.
Thank you. I would like
Teşekkürler, çok sağ
to
olun.
divert the conversation a little bit to pedagogy, if you don't mind. So I was giving a talk a few years ago about the use of figurative language and the importance of teaching figurative language to, you know, second language speakers of Persian. And so I was trying to explain that even from the beginning, like very simple words like to be born, it's very, you know, it's figurative. So bedunya amadan, right? And then I was trying to say how it's important for Persian, but not that important for other languages, not as important like in English. And then one of the people in the audience asked me, okay, can you do without teaching the literary aspect of Persian? Aren't there any word? Well, yes, there is mutawallid shodan. But I mean, she was trying to, you know, to pose that question to me, whether we can do without literary Persian in our Persian classes. So I just want to know, to hear your answer to that.
That's a very good question. Yeah, it seems like almost impossible to teach Persian without the figurative. Actually, you know, there are some languages that are more figurative than the other. Like, you know, if you compare and contrast Persian with German, for instance, you see that German is a little bit more straightforward, and you know, when they say something, they mean it. You know, whereas, you know, I mean, they also have a lot of figurative language. Don't get me wrong, but in general, Persian is full of hyperbole, full of irony, full of paradox. One other political example that I forgot to mention was, you know, this hashtag. I don't know if you remember Rouhani Mochakerim, you know, like it's you know, when Rouhani was in power, there was Mochakerim with a che, huh? You know, everybody, you know, if you give it to artificial intelligence, maybe it translates it as Rouhani, we're thankful to you, but it was actually sarcastic, right? You know, so in every, you know, if you go on social media and, you know, everyday language, you know, there is that existence of figurative language, and yeah, it's very hard. I think it's a very good question that you're yeah, the person
Thank you,
asked
Pardis. I know Azita has a question, but as a follow-up to that, you mentioned, you know, alliteration, trope, metonymy, all that, like these literary devices. I was wondering, when you teach them, do you expect your students to remember the terminology, or do you just expect them to know them, to recognize them when they see it?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, teaching in American academia, you can't really expect students to know a lot about grammar, about literary devices. So yeah, you have to either teach it or just, go with the understanding that they don't know it, and yeah, if you want, yeah, it depends on what level class you are in. Of course, if you're more advanced, I think you have to definitely say this is an ista'are, this is a tashbih, and then go into explaining what an ista'are is
Yeah,
from the
I agree,
technical
because I feel
literary
like,
point of view.
yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like if you don't put a name for something, it's very difficult to remember it. Like the same goes with grammar terms, right? Like even as simple as verb or direct object. So if they, if they don't know what it is and they don't have a name for it, they won't remember. So that's why probably teaching them the names of the literary devices is helpful. Okay, I'm going to go to Azita.
Okay, thank you so much. I didn't want to interrupt your wonderful discussion. I have a couple of comments about a beautiful discussion that we had because of Professor Lawson and Professor Sohaili's talk, and then Pune. Actually, based on, if we believe that we teach natural language, and we all believe that right now in communicative approach, we teach our students natural language. As Pardis mentioned, languages like Persian that are full of figure of speech, if we ignore them, I think that we do not do what is our real responsibility to our students. But the main point is that how we teach it and when we teach these kinds of figurative speech. And if you write the textbook, when you appear them based on the different proficiency level. But I believe that for language like Persian, we have to include figure of speech. And it's our life, any complementary things that we say, we have figure of speech over there. So if we believe that our students want to communicate with Iranian society, with Persian speaker, they have to know these kinds of figure of speech. But when we teach them and how we teach them, this is another story. This is a challenge for all of us. But as Professor Sohaili mentioned, the biggest challenge for teaching through literature, language through literature, is that we have a rule, and in literature, specifically poetry, we have to break the rule. How we can manage to transfer these to the students. And, as I think that in two specific method that Pardis mentioned in her lecture, we have to start with storytelling, which is prose. Prose, we do not break that much rule, and then move and shift to the poetry, as we will see in, for example, different textbook like Pune's textbook and so on. Or at the same time, when the students are a little bit intermediate, high, or mid, we shift them gradually from modern Persian and then to the classic. But I believe that, as Professor Sohaili mentioned, first, we have to teach them the grammar. That's why then we teach them how we break this rule in the grammar in poetry, and first start with prose. But at the same time, as Pardis and Pune has a beautiful discussion about that, in my classes, honestly, I am very sensitive that my students learn the terminology, because I help them learn the terminology of their native language grammar too. They have to learn, because part of the language learning, if we like it or not, is memorization. They have to know the concept, but they have to know the terminology, either literature or grammar. Honestly, perhaps I am very, very tough to my students, but I think that when I learned English, I learned the terminology. I learned in English literature what is simile, what is alliteration, and so on. So that's why we have to teach them in different aspects of the language. Sorry for long comment, but I wanted to wrap up this. Thank you.
No, that's wonderful. Actually, yes, I also agree with you that it's better to have an explanation. You know, it's always good to have explanation, but you can't, you know, overwhelm students like all at once. That's why, you know, when your wonderful question about when is important, because, you know, when do you start teaching these, you know, so you have to, you know, the suggestion and the best practices of teaching second language is you have to spiral it, you know, like just gradually, you know, build it. And if I suddenly come and teach Fana and Attar's poetry, you know, the piece that I was reciting here, then of course it's going to be, you know, you don't know how it's going to be taken by students. You know, if you have graduate students, that's a different story. But you know, an undergrad 18-year-old is going to maybe drop the course next session, you know? So you have to build up, and I think what you mentioned, you brought up the intermediate mid, intermediate low, novice levels. You know, these are ACTFL proficiency levels that you brought up. So it's a very good, very important to be cognizant of those levels for your students and know that, you know, like now you're teaching what level and what, you know, what kind of spiraling can you do and can you build up on it, you know? So it's very, very important questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Since nobody had a question, I can ask another question maybe. So when you talked about these strategies, you mentioned spiraling and storytelling. And from the discussions, the question answer right now, I have the understanding that by storytelling, you mean storytelling on the part of the students, and by spiral is on the part of the instructor. So I was wondering, how do you persuade students, let's say, assuming that they are the ones who are going to write the story, how do you encourage them to use the figurative language, since this is the topic that you were discussing? How do you encourage them to incorporate it in their stories?
Actually, storytelling could be both ways. It's both. Actually, I'm glad that you brought this up because I wanted to mention this, that both the teacher can also teach through storytelling. You know, a lot of this literature is more accessible if you do it with you know, through stories, you know, and having like a definable plot. So and then of course you can ask, you know, your students for assignments. They can nowadays, you know, everybody has a camera and you know, is very technically savvy, so they can write, you know, make you know, films on their, you know, or animations or digital kind of storytelling. So those are some of the strategies that I think that's you're right. The students are very much capable of doing it these days, but you need to, you need. So if you're, for instance, if you're teaching this Sham و گل و پروانه to elementary level students and you want them to make their own stories, you know, they can also you know, they can, you know, it's easy to do that for students, you know, tell them, give them for the prompts, you know, Sham و گل و پروانه, and then make a story of these, you know, one is a lover and one is a beloved, and you go out and maybe, you know, of course they need to be a little bit imaginative and creative in that respect. But then if you want them to make a conceptual story about Fana, then you can't do that in elementary levels, you know, novice learners. You have to do it maybe in a more advanced, and even then it's going to be difficult. But that's a very good question. Yeah, that's something to think about, how to incorporate figurative language in your storytelling techniques.
Thank you. Bilal, you're next.
Great. Thank you so much for this lovely presentation, Dr. Minuchehr. And reminded of the fond memories that I have of us being colleagues at the University of Virginia. And I couldn't resist but ask a small question. It's more of a comment.
Sure.
But the concept that really comes to mind, I'm thinking of all of the questions that we've had in the last few minutes. And really, I'm wondering if it would be useful to think of a new paradigm, perhaps, right? And bringing together pedagogy, language, literature, aesthetics, and so on. And really the concept, you already discussed it at the very beginning, thanks to poetry itself, which is sukhan. And I'm thinking of sukhan as a category that encompasses philology and linguistics and language, aesthetics, poetics, poetry, literature, even prose, as Azita Jan was mentioning. Is there some way to perhaps do a more radical kind of pedagogical move whereby we re-envision maybe some of these techniques that we have in the classroom? And I'm speaking now also as a teacher of language, a former teacher of language. Just a thought to put out there. Is there something within, let's say, the Persianate canon that can actually invent maybe some of the things that we do in the classroom and beyond? And I'm thinking, of course, of sukhan, if you could speak to that.
Thank you so much, Bilal. Yes, I also have very fond memories of our times together as colleagues, and I'm glad that you were here. And this is a very good question to think about. I can't tell you that I have an answer to it right off the top of my head. But you know, when you bring up sukhan, sukhan is actually I believe I mean I may be wrong, but the Sufi scholars in the room may correct me. But when you talk about sukhan, I always think of in the beginning was the word. So because you know, in Persian literature, sukhan is the beginning. So yes, so from the beginning, in the beginning was a word, and that's where light starts. So this is a very good project, and starting with sukhan. So from the very beginning, from this speech, you know, it's something that definitely we could build upon. And I think Funa Jan has been doing a great job with building these networks of Persian language scholars and Persian literature scholars. So dast Punejun ro mibuse, as they say.
Merci, Pardis Jan. Narges Jan, you're next.
Yes. So thank you very much, Professor Minuchehr. It was very nice meeting you first, and then thank you for your talking. So it's more like a comment or even thinking loud to myself, because I thought, how can we say that Persian is necessarily more figurative even than English? Because I mean, teaching Persian literature to students like Hafiz or Attar is just like when you teach Shakespeare to students of English. Of course, Shakespeare language is also full of literary devices, literary tropes, it's figurative. So that by itself doesn't show that Persian is necessarily more figurative than it is different in that Persian literature is more relevant to Iranian lives even today than perhaps Shakespeare is to the lives of American students. That is right. But then at another level, I think the figurative part of language comes into play in many of the compound verbs that we have. And that is something that our students need to learn, like be dast avardan, as dast dadan. All of them have and bring with them an image that students, if they don't know it, they don't understand. They know at dast and then as dast dadan or be dast avardan. So yes, I wanted to ask about your thoughts about different layers of figurative language. Yes, part of it is literature like Sham o Gul o Parvane, or those are interesting for students who are very much into literature. But also for talking or understanding even the news or even they also need some sort of grasp on this level of figurative language. So also in English, we also have the same thing, like things that if you want to understand the emails, or they say navigate through something. So it is also figurative, if I understand.
Absolutely. Yes. Actually, I was very careful. Yeah, thank you so much for that question and that point. I was very careful not to qualify one language as more figurative than the other. Actually, I did a little bit of research to see if anybody has done that. So this is as much as I've seen that they've said that Persian is very figurative compared to other languages. But yeah, I can't say that Persian is more figurative than English. Maybe there will be a research later on by linguists to do that. But as far as I have seen, I have not seen anything to that effect. So you're absolutely correct. I want to make sure that I put in that disclaimer that I'm not being evaluative here in any shape or form, but that's a very good comment. Thank you. And a very nice meeting you here too.
Thank you.
I think our time is
Thanks
up.
for all the things you're doing for AATP. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think the time is almost up. So I'm going to give back the floor to Azitajan to say the closing remarks. You're mute, Azitajan.
You're mute.
Sorry. Thank you, John, for moderating this wonderful, insightful, inspirational session. Thanks to Professor Minuchehr for this insightful and informative, very informative. I learned a lot from your lecture, and our audience's question makes that we have a very great discussion in pedagogy and also the literary aspects of the language. And I just want to say that we have one more lecture for this season, winter 2024, literature in second language pedagogy. It would be Saturday, May 11th. By Professor Yas Alizadeh from New York University. She is supposed to talk about reading what they speak, learning Persian through eulogies and accolades. So we are looking forward to seeing you in almost 1 month again. And thank you for your time. Have a wonderful weekend, evening, afternoon. See you next month. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody as well for being here, and John and Azitajan for hosting me. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.